Okay, we just finished listening to Voxtur's conference call. Both Colin and I were asking some questions. So, Colin, let's talk about what did you think about the conference call, the quarter? Let's go ahead.
Well, I think so. It's an unpopular opinion, but I'm okay with being unpopular. I was quite happy with the quarter, given that when if you take it in context of the industry, the top line dropping is not unexpected, and to me, that's basically relatively flat. Sequentially, they have, I guess, around -6 and -6. From Q1 to Q2 and then Q2 to Q3, which is not great, obviously, but this is in the context of, originations falling like 80%, refis falling like 90% plus. These are really unique and historic times in terms of the impact on the real estate sector. I was disappointed in the press release. I think, at the end of the day, putting out these year-over-year comps is a bit disingenuous, given the fact that they've made all these acquisitions, and so I think they're meaningless comps. What I think is important. Listen, you can put in the year and year, and then at least say, we made X amount of acquisitions. Just so you're not insulting your audience. I think the biggest takeaway for me with this quarter is that gross margin percentage increased from 32, 33 to 38%. And I think that's a significant move. That's one. Number two is because of all these acquisitions, there's so many non-cash related items that get bled into SG&A, and those SG&A numbers are not insignificant. I mean, they move the dial. So I think $7 million or something, $3 million from one-time elements, and then so amortization of intangible assets is $4 million, and cost related to non-operating items is 3.1. I think there's and you have to remember, like, some of these things, like, just simply there's certain costs even for these guys drawing down the lines of credit. I think in one instance, I think if you look at the financials, I forget exactly where it is, but they refer to, we took out 40 million, our net proceeds after costs were like 39 something. And I remember in my passing, I think it was like $700,000, like these costs are not insignificant. So, if you take that out, that it's rare that adjusted EBITDA is as meaningful with companies as it is with Voxtur, because if you take out, because the foreign exchange element is quite significant and getting bigger as a function of as US dollars becomes a bigger and bigger number for revenues, then you're going to get an FX benefit into the earnings. Where I think they need to, I think at some point very soon they need to start reporting in US dollars. I think that this FX stuff is starting to become noisy enough that they should just get rid of it. And these costs, these one-time costs. The other thing I asked her on the call was whether they would at least put a schedule, a go-forward schedule, because these amortization costs now are fairly known, right? So you can start to put a matrix so that you can give some guidance to the marketplace so you can go, oh, next quarter amortization is going to be $5 million or $6 million. So it puts it out there and starts to give some additional guidance. The other thing I think they did poorly is that I don't know what it's like. This company, their revenues dropped by 6%, where their competitors' revenues have dropped 30%, 40%, like these huge, massive, and they put this fluff piece of like year over year comparisons. If they had simply said, Q2 to Q3 dropped by 6% in the face of the most historic changes ever in the last 100 years of real estate impact, having interest rates fly up like 150, 100, 200 some odd basis points. That is massively important. So
yeah, and what's interesting is that they gain market share. So it's like they got more clients, and each of those clients has lower volume, but we still pretty much, we barely dropped. My question was, when I looked at the unearned revenue, and that's why I asked on the call, like, was there a particular revenue that you didn't recognize? And to think that they would have had a sequential growth, not huge growth, but they would have had a slight growth in revenue, and they would have been EBITDA positive in a time where it's like a war zone in the industry.
yeah. And I think
that's significant. And another thing that I find interesting is that after the numbers came out, I watched, before I looked at the numbers, I watched at the reactions, comments, emails, and things like that. And everybody's like, oh my God, this is bad. And I'm thinking like, what, instead of, I responded to one guy and I said, instead of reading comments, why don't you learn how to read financial statements? Because it's like, I don't know. The education of some of the investors in this space is like they don't even know what's going on. That they speak first, and they don't even look at the numbers. They don't know how to read the numbers.
Well, I quite like John from On Borrowed Time, and he was at least honest enough in his video thing where he could, his knee-jerk reaction was to be upset, but then when you actually lift the hood, it's a bit like having an F1 show. It's like having a car show up and there's a dented fender, and you realize, there was a 5,000 car pileup on the highway. All you have is a dented fender. Oh, and by the way, somebody put in an F1 engine into your Mercedes. Like, this is, to my mind's eye, they completely flubbed the PR. They should have said, sequentially, we dropped 6% in the face of, one of the most chaotic, violent markets in real estate history. They should have broken out in the call. Angela makes mention that, or was it Gary that made mention that, the appraisal business only dropped 2%. And we only got 5-6 days of blue water, and we get a ton of the costs, that come into the financials. And so when you look at that, and then the other thing they did that they really got to get their communication better. She says, we've dropped guidance, but from 170 to 190 to 140 to 150. But she doesn't say we're only doing that based on the previous in-place business lines. And so she's saying revenues are going to drop from we're going to guide to 140 to 150. But, without saying that that's only on the previous business lines, that it doesn't include the blue water. So, that should be like the first thing that comes out of somebody's mouth. We're dropping revenues. By the way, that's only based on the previous guided revenue business lines that we had. And so, I think if I were to write this press release, I would have said, in the face of a massive real estate dislocation happening, we only dropped 3%. Our appraisal business only dropped 2%. We've been gaining market share, but on a lower number. Our AOL has been adopted by X number of people, and the onboarding is continuing. Our RPTA business has had this new win. There's all these things that they could have said that are more meaningful. And the other thing that is amazing to me is everyone's all up in arms about a bunch of things, but the cash position went up quarter over quarter. And at the end of the day, the cash position, went from 11.8 to 12.2 to 12.3. Now that's a huge thing. Like, there's a whole, you can complain about this, you can complain about that, but EBITDA pulls out FX, EBITDA pulls out amortization, EBITDA pulls out 1 times. We're only down negative 1.4. We dropped 6%. But here we are getting ever closer to profitability while revenues have dropped again. Our gross margins have expanded. So this is the worst conditions possible. This is Jim and Gary have said time and time again, this business does well in all business environments. And here it is, in my opinion, it's improving as a function of, one of the great benefits sometimes of business going down is it makes management teams focus their attentions on costs, focus their attentions on efficiencies, focus their attentions on synergies and reducing costs. Whereas when you're really busy and money's flowing, sometimes those things get forgotten. So, revenues going from Q1 of 40.8 to 38.0 or 38.1 to 35 or 35.5 is not great. But this is like in the face of like 90% refis dropping off and 75 to 80% originations dropping off. So,
Right. I mean,
there's
look,
a reason behind this.
They told us that we're going to move towards profitability. That's what they told us. But they told us this before the storm came, right? So,
Yeah.
and they still almost managed to hit it. If it was, again, I'm going back to the same thing. If that freaking $3 million would have been recognized as revenue, they would have hit it during the fucking worst real estate market in 100 years. They would have hit it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there is a real element of, no one gives a shit about second place. No one cares about, close. Close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. But there's all these hot takes out there. Oh, they lost 9 million in operations. No, they didn't. They lost 9 million if you don't take in the one-time operations and the amortizations. Like, we only lost 1.4 million bucks, and our cash position went up. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, if I come to you and I say, here's my workout regimen and my exercise plan, and my goal is to be X amount of body composition and Y amount of weight, I can tell you anything I do, but at the end of the day, you're going to weigh me and you're going to check my body fat content and you're going to go, oh, okay, you're either on track or you're not. The real thing is the cash position and the real cash flow from operations and all non-cash items pulled out. And so if you do that, which is one of the rare times, normally I don't love EBITDA, but in this instance, it's probably more accurate than cash flow from operations. Or it's more actually truly more accurate than a CFO at this point.
Well, it has to be taken into account for 2 main reasons. Is one of those non-recurring expenses, right? That they incurred because of the activities associated with these acquisitions, and also this amortization, because it's amortization of intangible assets, and those intangible assets are under books because they're an acquisitive company. So
Yeah.
it had those things have to be taken into account to really look at the engine behind, and that's why they didn't lose 9 million in a quarter. They didn't. You have to look at those things.
Well, I think if you look at the MD&A on page 4, revenue goes 40.8, 38.0, 35.5. The loss goes from negative 11.9 to negative 4.3 to negative 1.7. And that's actually quite accurate. What's even more telling is the comprehensive income goes from negative 14 to negative 905,000 to plus 6.3 million. Now, I don't like that one. Typically, when you have these massive, comprehensive can be very useful if you're reporting in the same currency as your primary business. Because we report in Canadian dollars, and I think she said 95% of revenue now is in USD. It's that comprehensive income is just going to be an absolute noise fest until they finally convert to US dollar reporting, because it's only about income. The thing about the adjusted EBITDA is at least it takes out a lot of these noisy elements, including the FX noise. So right now I would rely more on adjusted EBITDA because it pulls out that noise of the FX. Comprehensive income, if they go to reporting in USD, will likely be a better metric again. But I think there's a lot of same goal problems. Doing this comparative to year over year is just no longer realistic given all the acquisitions. It looks too fluffy. Their real win was they only went down 6% in the face of Armageddon, and they almost broke even, and that their cash flow went up. Those are the three things they should have said. But they chose these fluff pieces of 40% growth this, 100% growth that. Those are meaningless, and everyone knows they're meaningless. I think Angela knew it was meaningless. I don't know who, and maybe there's an element where you have to, listen, there's a lot of reasons to do same quarter year over year comparisons, because if there is cyclicality or seasonality in your business, then those comparisons are better. Listen, like some businesses, Q1 is crap, Q4 is best, and they literally go in a straight line up. Q2 is better, Q3 is better, Q4 is better. Some are super seasonal, and that seasonality really impacts it. I don't know what the seasonality is yet. I don't think anybody knows. There's just too much noise. So there is some benefit to comparing same quarter year over year. But the problem is when you have 2-3 acquisitions, in that mix, there's just too much noise. It's meaningless. But they had real comps that they could have put out. EBITDA negative, only 1.7, up from negative 3.9. Comprehensive, I wouldn't have done because of the FX. But their loss of only negative 1.7 is material, and operations are getting very close to break even. These are the wins that they could have spoken about, but they didn't, and it's a shame because I think they buried the lead with fluff.
Yeah, good point. It's kind of like, it reminds me of like when you do comparisons of a quarter from one year to of quarter of the next year. It's like let's say you have an apartment building and then you acquire another apartment building and you say, well, from quarter to quarter our revenue doubled. Well, yeah, but you bought another apartment building. Like what I'm interested in is if the current apartment building, if you got more tenants in, and if you increased revenue, in the current one, not because of the acquisition.
Well, that's why they got to get to this business unit reporting element, right? I mean, the more they parse this stuff, or they eliminate, like they could have eliminated, they could have said our revenues based on they could have pulled out the acquired revenues and compared that. There's a whole bunch of things they can do that they're not doing yet. I think in part it is a function of they're doing these acquisitions and it's overwhelming the financial report. That's my personal opinion. I don't think this is done out of malevolence or trying to hide anything. I think it's a very overwhelming process, getting all these companies, getting the reporting coming in, getting them all on the same platform, getting everybody's information in. I think at some point in time, you're just happy to get the top numbers figured out before you start parsing the lower levels. So I think this is better in many ways than I expected. To me, 6% is relatively flat given this. Would I have liked it to be actually flat or moderately positive? 100%. To your point, revenue recognition and timing of that is a big problem with these things, and that type of stuff is really, you could be a CEO or even the CFO, and you go, okay, we plan on doing this, and then the auditors come in and go, look, you really shouldn't recognize this. You get into a battle with your auditor, discussion, maybe a better word. You get into a deep discussion about methods and processes, and then the audit firm many times win those battles because they're just going to not put their name to it. And so, and quite frankly, I prefer a conservative approach versus revenue recognition, because I'll tell you, it's one thing to defer it from quarter to quarter. It's a whole other ball of wax when you have to pull revenue that you've recognized previously off your income statement. That looks 10 times worse. So the deferral element doesn't bother me as much, but it goes to how capricious and how volatile some of these revenue numbers can be as a function of recognition. So, I'm quite happy with this top line. I'm happy given, someone says, hey, the whole highway just had all these car crashes. There's tons of death. If you let's say you have a kid out on that highway and your kid comes home and they've only got a dent in the car and somehow the engine's been upgraded and your kid's alive, you're like, oh, all things considered, that's a win. Kid's alive, car's got a dented frame, but the engine's upgraded somehow. Okay, I'll take that. And that's how I sort of look at this one. To me, it's like, you see all these other real estate companies report, all these other tech companies, by the way, that are getting decimated because they're losing 50 million. I don't know what, I have to look at what Doma was, but I think Doma was, some crazy amount of loss. And ASPS is another one that I think has significant losses. And yet, they're getting held out as a foreclosure play. So I think last, so yeah, let me look at this quarterly on Doma. I don't know if it caught okay, so they already caught this. So the operating income was negative 46 million, pre-tax income of negative 83. Their basic EPS, I mean, their revenues went from 123 down to 107. Spitball, call that a drop of like 25% or something, or 20%. These are big drops, and their bottom lines are collapsing. So I think that, somebody says, "Oh my God!"
Right. So you said you said something interesting, right? So they're
thank God.
Big drops in revenue, huge drops in bottom line, and we have a tiny drop in revenue and a big improvement in the bottom line.
100%. I mean, I don't know what else to say to, like, I don't know what else people want to hear. I mean, maybe everyone's going to say I'm a pumper or I'm a this or I'm a that, but at some point in time, this is about looking through to the ultimate elements. And from my mind's eye, this is um, this is the discipline of management, discipline of the board, discipline of the different underlying business units, and a testament to the need of technology and offerings that increase throughput and reduce costs and increase accuracy for products in the real estate space. So I think this looks good. Again, if somebody said to you, hey, your kid is out on the highway, there was 5,000 car pileup, tons of deaths, your kid shows up, A, alive, like, maybe a little shaken, B, only a slight damage to the fender of your car, and C, with an improved engine somehow, you're relieved. Our
No,
dented bumper.
I would have called you a pumper and dumper. But
So
you're not as big of a pumper and dumper as me. I am the chief pumper here. You gotta give me that.
amen. I'll give you whatever you want. But from my mind's eye, I think there's this lack of recognition of what Jim and Gary and team have done in terms of, it is a very rare time that you get to hear a company say we do well in all markets. And I don't think Gary and Jim, and I know my bingo card didn't have a war in Ukraine, cranking of commodity prices, supply chain limitations, all of these conflagration, conflation of all these different items happening all at once, coming together to create a perfect storm of inflation, having a knee-jerk reaction by, quite frankly, by the way, I think these interest rates are not going to do a ton to inflation, but that's a whole other goddamn conversation. I think it's just actually supply chain driven. But it is having a material impact on real estate, like real impact on real estate. And so here we are with a management team that has said this business is well suited for all business environments. And here we are with the numbers that you see in originations, the numbers you see at refi, and we're only down from 40.8 down to 35.5. But yet the gross margins have improved, and we're getting ever closer to profitability. So to my mind's eye,
going back to your example of the kid on the highway with the crash of all the cars. So now the question is, what is that kid with that car going to look like when there's no crash, when the cars are moving nicely?
Right. He's got an upgraded engine and he knows how to survive a major crash. It proved, let's maybe not say the kid has got it, but let's say the car is the tech and it's got some, auto driving, self-driving capabilities. It proved it could get your kid home in one piece. So, and the kid in this case, I think, is the investment. So, I just think that this is done significantly better than people give it credit for. I do place a certain amount of the blame at the feet of management putting out what I think is not the world's best communication. I think when Angela put out the changes of guidance without the caveat that says this does not include anything to do with the new business line. So that would probably also include MTE and Blue Water, because both those, the guidance didn't include that. But again, I'm projecting, because she didn't explicitly say that. She did explicitly say that it didn't include blue water. I don't think MTE is material enough in many ways to have as big an impact. But these type of clarifications would be better, in my opinion, and highlighting the fact that you're almost break even, highlighting the fact that margins increase, highlighting the fact that you only dropped 6% when everybody else's revenues fell off a cliff, highlighting the fact that our bottom line has improved within this context, which would highlight that cost controls are coming into place, which would highlight the fact that cash went up. Those are the highlights. Year over year comps are fluff. They're meaningless, and everybody knows it now. And they need to put them in there because they've been doing it, but at least highlight the more material elements. I mean, they literally buried the lead on all this stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think it's good. Let's finish it here. Thanks for your time.
All right. Good talking to you. Take care. Bye-bye.